Welcome to the Soul Surgery Podcast. My name is Nikki Clinch, and I am your host. I am a maturation facilitator, teacher and coach, integrative holistic health counselor, breathwork facilitator, and author. I am the founder of the Academy of Maturation Coaching, the Alchemy of Being, where I train as many people as I can to become powerful spaces for human beings to come home to their authentic truth. Maturation is a powerful evolutionary process of dissolving trauma, breaking free of stuck patterns, and growing and healing at the taproot. Growing out of who we thought we were from the stories led by our past conditioning in order to grow and evolve into who we were born to be. In this podcast, I will be sharing many different things with you, opening up the doorways to my coaching sessions where you can witness with your own eyes how trauma contaminates our reality and how we can dissolve it, heal it at the root, and rewrite the story of our lives, reclaiming our power and reminding each one of us that who we are is wholeness. I will be interviewing some of the world's most prominent teachers in spirituality, healing, transformation, and human evolvement, and sharing with you my own teachings and learnings along the way. And above all, sharing with you my heart. The purpose of this podcast is to remind each one of you who you really are, to open up the doorway to a new possibility, to a new paradigm, to healing, health, transformation, and our evolvement as individuals and a species. So I hope you enjoy today's episode. One thing that you can do for me, if you find this podcast useful and if you love it, please do subscribe. And if you feel called to, leave a review, because reviews really matter. They help to spread the word and help to spread this podcast to as many people as we can. And lastly, if you have any big aha moments, any shifts, any insights in any of these episodes, please do share it with me. Share with me which episode it was, where in the episode it happened, and how it has impacted you and your life. So without further ado, let's get going. I hope you enjoy today's episode on the Soul Surgery Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode. I feel excited to share with you today's episode and today's story. This is my first episode to record here in my new home in New Zealand, not just my new home, as in we just moved into this house a couple days ago, but also my new home in a new country, in a new world, in a new reality, in a new existence. Everything is new. And I want to use this episode to share with you how me and my husband emigrated in the middle of a pandemic with 2 young children. How did we make this possible when everything was telling us it was impossible? How did we do this? Literally, I'm going to talk you through how we did it physically in a 3D realm, but also how we did it on an emotional level and an energetic level. Like, what did I have to shift and release and grow and expand in my emotional self and my energetic self in order to make this possible, and what it's like now that I'm here. So the gifts of this episode, I hope, is to gift you with the knowing that if you have a calling in your heart, even if it is the quietest whisper, that calling is speaking to you for a reason, that calling is speaking to you from your heart. I had an episode a few weeks ago where I speak about living from the heart, where I speak about aligning with your purpose, and it can't come from the logical mind. None of this comes from the logical mind. It has to come from the risk of listening and honoring the heart. The heart is not interested in understanding. The heart is only interested in flying and soaring. Something that I think we as human beings, or at least the way we have been being human being in the old paradigm, which we have just left, that we as human beings, we don't recognize this experience of flying very much unless we're high, or we're drinking alcohol, or we're madly in love, or we've been intoxicated somehow by some added extra. We don't really recognize this experience of flying, like soaring. Let's use the word soaring, because the word soaring is literally like that moment where the bird is just gliding through the air without needing to flap its wings, without needing to do anything. It is in complete unity and oneness with the sky. And that is what the heart thrives on. That is what the heart thrives on. And so if this episode gifts you with anything, it is that when you honor that whisper and you take the risk to fly, you take the risk to leap off what you know, which can feel like jumping off a cliff, then you may just open the possibility into a completely new way for you to live. So let's begin. So my husband and I, Kev and I, and our two young kids, Callum, who's now 2 years old and 3 months, and my daughter Taya, who is 7.5, we have been talking about this for a while, or me and Kev have been talking about this for a while. And we've been talking about moving to New Zealand for probably about 5 years. My husband is a Kiwi. I think he probably brought it up before we were even married. Like, we've been together, married, coming up to 6 years. We've been together nearly 10. And so he brought it up with me like in the first year. And I guess that's what Kiwis do. Sorry for the generalization for any Kiwis listening to this episode. But it's like, if you marry a Kiwi man at some point, or a woman, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's different for women. But if you marry a Kiwi man at some point, there is some invitation that he's going to want to return home. And now I'm here, I understand why. There is a real connection to the land here. There's a connection to home. There is a feeling of home here. And I can understand why Kev had that pull to return. And his dream was to return with his family. That was his dream. But when he brought it up with me, at the beginning, it seemed like a nice pipe dream. Far away, magical place, New Zealand. But if I'm really honest, deep down inside, I never really considered it as something I would be willing to do. And I'll tell you why. The woman that I was then was thinking and behaving and dreaming and visioning in a very different way to the woman I am now. The woman I was then was 100% consumed in my success. I needed to make sure that I was going to have everything accessible to me so that I could honor my purpose, honor my vision, honor my mission. The thought of leaving London, where everything moves so fast and you can get everything and you can get anything. And this is where everyone is, right? This is where all the busy is. This is where it's all happening. The thought of leaving there felt like a death. It felt like, firstly, it felt like a career death. But it felt
boring to me to leave that intensity. And so I kind of kept telling him, yeah, one day. Yeah, one day. And then as the years went by, he would keep bringing it up, and I just wasn't ready. And all for these reasons. And if I'm really honest, on a deeper level, I was really frightened. I was frightened about, and I'm just going to be really honest with you. These are the things that I was the most afraid of when we first started talking about this dream. For me, the fears that came up for me were, I was afraid of leaving this life where I had created this incredible independence that I had. I relied on being this independent, strong woman. I had created a life where I didn't need that many people. And I mean really need, like vulnerably need and emotionally need. I was in control. I was the boss. I knew where things were. People knew who I was. There was a reliance on this kind of independence that I didn't recognize at the time, but I can see it clearly now. And I was so afraid to let that go. I was so afraid to trust that if I were to lean in to life, if I were to lean in and surrender, that I would be supported and taken care of. And then I had another big fear, which kind of sits alongside it beautifully. The first one, I was afraid to leave my life and everything I knew to give myself to this man. Even though I was living with him, even though I was having babies with him, even though I got married to him, on an emotional level and a vulnerable level, I was afraid to lean in so deeply and give myself to this man. And I don't mean submit. I don't mean like codependently give my power away. I mean let go of my ruthless independence in service and honor of leaning into being with him. And these two fears come from the same story. They come from the story of Nikki that had to be the warrior woman in order to survive the trauma of her childhood, that in order to survive the hungry child that lived within me, in order to survive and make sure that I will never be abandoned, nothing terrible would ever happen to me again. I didn't even realize that masked in this powerful front and, relatively successful work that I was doing and way that I was being in the world, masked by all of this was survival, being led by survival. Now, the world out there wouldn't have recognized it, not the majority anyway. But it's not about what it looks like, it's about where you're coming from. And so I was still coming from a place where I was trying to survive my story, my past. And when you're coming from a place to try and survive your past, there's no way to create a completely new life for yourself from that realm. It doesn't fit. I could have any life I wanted as long as it fit within the box and the walls of the story of the warrior woman, the one that was strong and tough and independent and was never going to and that had survived her trauma and wasn't going to let that happen to her again. It wasn't going to happen. And only when I look back on it now can I see how much coming from that place was starving me of a possibility I didn't even know existed. It wasn't even in my perception. It wasn't anywhere in my realm of understanding that I could live at the level of freedom and peace and nourishment and abundance and thriving that I am living now. It didn't fit in the box of that story. There was no room for this. There was no existence of it. And interestingly, even if it had come into my life, which it was trying to, I was rejecting it because it didn't align with who I thought I was and who I thought I needed to be. And so as the years went by, my husband and our marriage started to fall apart. We had different dreams. We had different wants. So we thought. So I thought. And most of you know, we separated last year. Well, actually, the year before, we separated in 2019, and my husband moved out. And there was a real possibility. It was a real reality that when we were separated, we were on the path of divorce. And there was a real reality that he was going to move back to New Zealand on his own. And me and the kids would be in the UK. And that was just the most devastating thing to entertain. But I just couldn't see any other way. We couldn't even talk to each other. We just were so full of hurt and anger. And so it was almost like the dream that we had always had or we had been talking about for years was just crumbling or had crumbled. And I remember in the depth of that pain, the depth of that separation, when I really thought we were going to be divorcing and that he could be moving back here on his own, when I really was deep in that. I remember dropping deeply into points of stillness when I was meditating or when I was journaling, when I was really listening to life. And I remember thinking and feeling, this doesn't feel like the end. This doesn't feel like this is how it's meant to go. But really, the truth is, I don't know how it's meant to go. And so I just kept handing it over to life. And my husband and I just kept turning up for therapy every week, not to try and fix our marriage, but to try and be able to live consciously with each other so that we could parent our children together. And, most of you know that we managed to have a breakthrough. And when my book comes out, my book Surrender is coming out on the 1st of June. When that comes out, you will be able to read the full story of that process that my husband and I went through to completely transform the places in which we were standing in order to birth a new relationship, because that's exactly what we did. We literally birthed something completely new, and we got remarried and we renewed our vows at the beginning of 2020. And so that's really where this story now begins, this part of the story. We returned back, we got remarried here in New Zealand, and it was January 2020. And we returned back to the UK, and we were planning our emigration. The plan was that we would extend our time here in New Zealand every year. We would come every year and we would spend 3 months at a time, and then we would go back. And that was the only way I could see it being able to work, that I could do my job, my book was coming out, and all these things that my mind was telling me that I had to be in England for. And so that was the plan. So we applied for my residency visa. in January 2020. And then we returned back to the UK. And then COVID-19 happened. I remember the day that we went into lockdown in London in March. I remember that day so well because I remember it was about 5 p.m. and my children were home and we were all home and we had kind of got dinner ready and my husband was putting dinner on the table and I was standing in the kitchen and I suddenly realized everything that we've ever known about this life is about to crumble. Just the severity and the hugeness of what was happening. I could feel it on an energetic level, on a collective level, and also on a 3D level, the fact that literally every shop, every restaurant, London was like a ghost town and it happened overnight, boom, like that. And I remember I dropped to the floor in the kitchen, not like dramatically like a Hollywood movie. I kind of sat on the floor and it hit me like a ton of bricks and I just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And it felt like everything was dying. And I could feel it. I could feel it and I knew it. Everything was dying. Everything that we have known and everything that we have used and recognized and the way that we have been being in this world was coming to an end. I could feel it. And as we went into lockdown, everything that I had planned, and I'm sure all of you were the same, just started to crumble. I had planned my entire year, my business plan. My book was meant to come out in 2020. All the plans I had made, the projects I was meant to launch, I was literally just about to sign a contract, a 2-year contract on an office that I was about to move into. I literally was about to sign it 2 days before lockdown hit. And I remember thinking I was going to sign it. And I remember there was a little voice coming from somewhere saying to me, wait, pause, just pause. Something else is coming. And I paused for a few days and the pandemic hit. If I had signed that contract, I would have been legally bound to that office for 2 years and I would have had to pay the rent for that every month, even through this pandemic. And I wouldn't have been able to use it at all. And so I just had this experience that everything that I knew about our life and about what I thought was our life was coming to an end, was crumbling. And I just kept hearing surrender, surrender. Just let it all go. And keep listening to life. What is life telling you? Not the news, not social media, not influencers, not the head of the government, not the president of the United States. What is life telling you? That is what I kept hearing. And I kept asking life, what do you need from me? And I just kept hearing, right now, just let it all go. And as the months went by, that is exactly what happened on a level that I don't think any of us ever imagined, on such a deep level. And so as everything on the outside was letting go, like releasing, like literally crumbling, the way that we lived our lives, the routines that we lived, the structures that we used, the restaurants we went to, the banks that we would go to, the ways that we would interact and connect with each other, just so many ways that had defined what we called our life just ended. And what that did for me is that it gifted me with the opportunity to really question how I have been living my life. And there were two gifts that came out of this. Well, many gifts, but the two main gifts were, one, the ideas that I had in my mind, the story that I had in my mind about who I needed to be in the world in order to be somebody, that I had to be in this buzzy, successful city to be somebody, that I had to be busy and active and seen all the time, that I had to be strong and independent and in control all the time. You know, all these stories in my mind that I had about who I needed to be and that I needed to be somebody at all, that just suddenly didn't seem at all. Lockdown enabled me to really start questioning that thinking and that story. And simultaneously, the two big fears that I had about moving pretty much got solved. I was afraid of moving my business not being able to be abundant while I was living in New Zealand, and lockdown forced me to learn how to do everything online. And it taught me how to lead somatic dance online. It taught me how to lead really amazing big webinars online. It taught me how to lead breath work online. It taught me how to lead really powerful transformational programs online. It was awesome. I'm so grateful because now I'm working with people from literally all over the world that I was never able to reach before. And the other big fear was about pulling my daughter out of school and not knowing what to do with her. Now, when she was homeschooling, we learned that actually she really loved it. And we got to teach her what we wanted to teach her. And it just started to smash apart that conditioning about how life is meant to look, how a happy, balanced, grown up, mature life is meant to look. You know, go to this school, have this job, make this much money, 9 to 5, have this house. Like, I suddenly realized that all of that was just a story. And when I really tapped into my heart, it's not really what nourished me. In fact, I was pretty damn tired. I didn't feel very good. I didn't feel good living in a flat in London with like 3 other flats above, and you could hear each other all the time. I didn't feel good walking out of my door and only seeing concrete, and my children only ever saw concrete. I didn't feel good in my daughter going to a school and not seeing any green anywhere. And as I went deeper into lockdown, I learned something so remarkable, that actually all these things I thought I needed to have a happy life was just rubbish. I was really happy with a really simple life. I just wanted to spend time with the trees in my garden and the people that I loved and doing work that fulfilled me. Everything else kind of felt really noisy. And so something was starting to shift. Now, on a 3D level, what started to happen was we started getting all these blocks. So we heard from the New Zealand Immigration that my visa had been completely stalled and that they'd shut all the borders and they were no longer processing any applications for offshore applicants indefinitely. They didn't even give us a date of when they were thinking of opening up again. It was indefinite. And so we were like, whoa. So I remember hearing that news going, and I said to my husband, it's okay. We're still going to go. Something's going to happen. And I could feel it. Simultaneously, as my old story and conditioning was dying, at exactly the same moment, space was being created for a new story. And that is what happens in maturation. As the old melts away, conditioning, the stories, the ideas, the identifications, the attachments of who you think you need to be, as the old melts away. And if you really allow it to melt away, it creates an emptiness, a spaciousness, a nothingness. So as this spaciousness was occurring and appearing inside myself with every idea or story or attachment to who I knew I was and how I knew myself to be in the world and who I needed to be in the world, as all of that started to melt away, this new seeing started to birth through. I started to experience life differently. Simplicity, nature, stillness. So, then we found out about the visa, and we find out that they've put it on hold indefinitely. And so my husband and I, we just don't know where this is going, but I swear on my life, whenever I tapped into my deep inner stillness, I just knew. I knew it. I knew we were going to move. I knew it. I just didn't know how, and I didn't know who I was going to be to do it, and I didn't know what it was going to look like. But I just kept saying to my husband, and I suppose I just trusted completely in life. I said, something is going to happen. Let's just keep waking up every day and doing what we need to do to take care. And so that's what we did. And I just kept showing up for work. And as the months went by, I kept doing that deeper inner work inside of myself. I really tapped into that fear around love that I didn't even know was there. Like if I gave my full whole self, there was a deeply rooted terror that I would be abandoned and punished, which is exactly the trauma of my childhood. So my husband and I had to do this deep work in therapy around being able to really surrender to each other, even though we've been married for like 6 years and together for 10. But deep in my knowing, I just kept hearing, keep moving forwards. So I did. So we applied for that visa. And then I hear back 4 weeks later that I've been awarded that visa. But they tell me that if you want to use this visa, you have to be in the country within 3 months. And my stomach literally flips. Like I feel like I've been kicked in the stomach. Why? Because it is do or die now. Like literally, do we go or do we get stuck here and wait for God knows how many years? And I just turned to my husband and I said, let's jump. And it really did feel like a jump. There was no guarantees, nothing fit on a logical sense. And I just kept hearing this knowing, this listening. I was listening to this space behind the words, behind the thoughts, and I could hear this is the path. At first, we were going to rent our London place. Again, noise in my mind. Oh, you should keep your London place as long as possible. Isn't that what everybody says? You should keep it as long as possible and let it increase in price and rent it out and da-da-da. And every time I felt it in my body at the thought of moving to this new life while still owning this flat and renting it out and the energy of it, it just felt heavy and wrong and like not at all the kind of freedom and spaciousness that I was looking for. And so I said to my husband, let's sell. I know that logically it doesn't make any sense, to sell a place in London in the middle of COVID-19. I mean, my mind was like, who's going to buy a house in London right now? Like, no one. But my heart was like, it doesn't feel right to go with this heaviness, this weight, this holding on. Just let it go. And I kept feeling in my body what it would feel like if it sold. And we moved with just a few bags, and we had that money in our bank, and it just felt like freedom. And so we put it on the market. And we started having viewings, and we weren't getting any nibbles. And we would literally take the kids out for walks. I think we were still in semi-lockdown by this time. And we would take the kids out for walks so that the estate agent could show the people around. And then we came back from a walk, and there was this couple sitting outside, and they were kind of looking a bit pissed off. And I said, hi, what's up? And they were like, well, we were meant to be viewing this property. And I said, well, that's our home. And they said, well, the estate agent hasn't shown up and she's not picking up her phone. So I was like, oh, well, let me show you around. So I showed them around my house, and I told them the story. Me and Kev, we were just like you two when we moved in here. We were just a couple and just starting off, and we wanted a family and we wanted to make a life. And I knew as I was showing them around, these people are going to buy this house. I could feel it. I could feel that as a flow of exchange, as a flow of abundance. We weren't just selling the house. We were passing on the house to another foundation of life who were going to create more life. And that's what we used the house for. That's what the house gifted us. And I knew it. I could feel it. Just this absolute exchange of abundance and flow. So then we didn't hear back from them. Then nothing happened. And then we got made an offer. And it was really low. And so we negotiated. And eventually we agreed on a price, and they were going to be our buyers. And there were just so many blocks that started happening. There was a second surge. Boris Johnson said that there would be no travel unless it was essential. And the lockdown would finish the day after we were meant to fly. Our first block of flights were cancelled. We had to get another set of flights, which meant that we had like the shortest transit time in Singapore, that we weren't even guaranteed we could make it, especially with two young kids. We took the flight. And then we found out there was going to be a Heathrow strike on the day we were meant to fly. And I just kept letting the noise just flow over my head. And I even went through a phase where I literally unfollowed like 350 people from my Instagram page, not because I don't like them, but because I just needed to clear the noise. I didn't want to attach to any noise. I just kept listening to this deep stillness. And I knew we would get on that plane. And as we were packing up, it was like I was also releasing a story and a way of being in the world that had been attached to my past self. It was so transformational, both externally and internally. And, it all happened with ease. We got on our plane. There were only a quarter people on the plane. Nobody tried to stop us. Nobody gave us problems. People weren't weird or scared. People wore their masks. Callum was like crazy, climbing everything. But it was so empty that we had literally 2 big rows to ourselves, so Callum could lie down and sleep. It wasn't easy doing a 24-hour flight with a toddler, but, it was pretty at ease. And then then we went straight into quarantine. And that was one of the hardest, most strangest experiences of my life. Literally, we were in a 5-star hotel room that we weren't allowed to leave. We were only allowed to go outside every other day for 45 minutes in a car park. And Callum wasn't allowed to run because they didn't want him to sweat. And if he touched anybody by accident, or even somebody's toy, or even somebody's shoe, they would add on days to our quarantine time. So it was a really tense environment. It was not far from being in prison, except it was a 5-star hotel. It was like a luxury prison. And yet we still managed to do it with ease. My husband and I, we just dropped into that simplicity, and we immediately got into a routine. We both decided to start exercising every day, which felt amazing. We just surrendered and surrendered and surrendered into the moment. And it was hard. But everything passes. I knew it wasn't permanent. You know, I think one of the biggest things that helped me be able to just continually take these risks, surrendering the control, surrendering the knowing, and just dropping into the present, dropping into that stillness, was that I trusted my ability to deal with things in the present. Most of our suffering and our struggling, and most of the blocks and the limitations to our dreams, is the noise in our mind that is projecting into the future. How will I get on that plane? How can we possibly move if our house hasn't even sold? We hadn't even exchanged yet. And we left the country. We literally packed up the house and left the house. We didn't leave it abandoned. We had people coming in to check it, but we left. Like, what if these people pulled out? We just kept trusting and following this listening. And it is 100% the noise in the mind that creates all the chaos and the crisis. Yes, we had to go through some really hard things to do this move. I mean, it was tough as hell to do it with 2 young kids, but it was also kind of easy. We laughed a lot, we played a lot, we joked a lot. And what was the most beautiful thing is we all knew, all 4 of us, that we were on this adventure following our hearts. And it was fun. And when we got out of quarantine, I mean, we literally arrived in paradise. You know, it has been such a transformational experience for me. As I have been here, you know, I have started to remember things about my childhood I had completely forgotten. Every day that I walk in the bush, every day that I go to the beach, every day I allow that warm sun to hit my skin, I remember my roots. I remember that I was a little girl that grew up in Hong Kong, that grew up in the sea and in the pool, that grew up in the sun, that's Asian, that my grandparents are from Thailand and China, that my roots are in the jungle and the ocean, and it's just been so healing, and I know that it's been healing because to get here, I had to surrender the story of who I thought I needed to be to survive, in order to allow who I really am to start landing and aligning with my life, or my life aligning with me. And it has been happening with ease. Another really big story that I had to completely just let go of was that I can't make abundant sources of money whilst going to the beach in the daytime and being with my kids. You know, in London, I would slog 9, 10, 12-hour days and just feel burnt out and really crap. here I wake up at 5 a.m., I work till 10. I spend the day with my kids. We go to the beach, we walk in the bush, we swim in waterfalls, and then I put them to bed, or my husband puts them to bed, and I come back to work. And it's like, oh, am I allowed this life? Can you really run a successful business this way? Yes, because everything else that tells you you can't is just a story. 100% of what blocks our ability to follow our dreams is conditioning, story. The story that you think you are and that you need to survive, and the story that society has taught us. We are in such an exciting time on this planet. I know with all of my being that it's the pandemic, the virus is not the pandemic, even though it is. The real pandemic that we are being shown and witnessing is the way we have been human, the way we have been being human beings. We have been steeped in survival, led by survival, creating survival systems, living in survival. And survival has nothing to do with living. It has everything to do with not dying. And I believe that we are now moving out of that, and it will be painful because many are going to fight against it and resist it, because to let it go, we have to let go of this control and this knowing to try and not die. But the gift is aliveness. The gift is life. I may die tomorrow, but I will feel proud and at peace with what I have chosen to use this life for so far. How I have lived it with my children, how I have lived it with my husband, how I have lived it with myself. So that is our story of emigration. We are here now. Oh, I missed out the most amazing part. On the flight, on the way here, we were just about to land in Singapore, and I get an email, and it's from the Emigration saying that I have been awarded my permanent resident visa. And it becomes active the day, they didn't even know I was flying. It becomes active the day I was landing. Alignment. And the visa means that I can travel whenever I want. I am a permanent resident indefinitely. I can work. I can buy property. And it just came through like a when I wasn't even looking, I wasn't thinking, I wasn't grasping. It just landed in flow. And that is what happens when we are willing to live beyond the story. So I hope this has served you. I hope this has gifted you with something to listen to those callings and start listening to a space behind all the thoughts and in your heart. So thank you for listening, guys. If you loved this episode, please leave me a review. Reviews really matter. They really help. They help Soul Surgery get spread far and wide, and more people get to hear this content. And if you love the podcast, please subscribe, become one of my subscribers, and so you can get these episodes in your inbox as soon as they come out. And of course, as always, if you had any big aha moments or big shifts in this episode, please do share with me. You can DM me on Instagram, or you can email me or write a comment in YouTube. Just get in touch, because I want to hear it, or post about it on your social media page and tag me at Nikki_Clinch, because I love hearing about your healing. That is part of my vision. So thank you for listening. This is Soul Surgery.